Okay, welcome back to Java. Now, as you can see, things are looking a little bit different, and that's because I created a class, a separate one from main. There's a few ways you can make classes. You can put them inside of your, of your main file that you're running, or you can also have a separate file, and you can then, obviously, you can then use the contents of that within this. Now, classes are interesting because we've already been using a class, which is our main class. But basically classes are pretty much just it's almost like a container for all your methods and all your variables. And whenever you want to use them, you can then use a class object, right? Now, yet again, what is an object? An object is pretty much just when you take an instance of a class, right? So you have an onion class, which defines basically the general onion, and then you could create multiple different individual onions that inherit all of the functions, everything from the class. So yet again, these are the two ways you can create classes. You can either put them inside of a Java file like this, so you could have multiple classes. Like I could make a class, I don't know, let's just say person. You can make a person class, you can make anything, right? And you can have it in here, or you can make a separate file. I'm going to show you how I did this. I made user, but I can go new and then class. And the reason why you'd want to make a separate file is because it's a little bit more readable. It doesn't mean you have all your code in one file. It's good to spread it out over multiple files. So either way, you can do either and it will work the same way. But I just put the name in. In this case, I want to make a, let's say, what can I put here? These are random, by the way. You don't really have to do it. Generally, also another thing, you usually use a capital letter. Make sure you use a capital letter when you do a class. But yet again, as we can see, public class. Now, as you can see, we have public, and in here we have class. Now, the public is the one that's run, and it's also, well, I guess you could say the public is the one that is the name of the Java file. So you have your Java file, and whatever the name of the Java file is the public class. So whatever that name is, that's what's going to be the public. And every other class definition is just class. There's no public next to it. So yeah. So now that we have a few classes we can play around with, what can you do with them? Well, you can create objects. And yet again, like I said, objects are basically just an instance of a class. So if you have a class person, we would generally have like a classification, a person, and then you would have people, right, that fall under the class of person. So let's say a person has a name, so we can say string name, and then we can, let's just have that for now. We have a string name. So a person has a name. And then what we can do is we can go into our main method right here, which is going to yet again execute everything automatically. And we can then go person, and this is, then you put the name of your object. So this thing, I'm just going to say p1 is equal to new person, and then we put brackets, and then we're done. So what is this exactly? Well, this is just, yet again, you could think of this just like a variable. So you have a variable, and then so you have the variable name, and then you have the data type. Well, you could think of an object, you could think of a class as being like a data type, and the objects being individual variables. So in this case, we have a person, and the name of the person variable is p1, and then we put this new keyword to say that it is a new instance of the person class. And this here, the brackets, basically this is where you'll pass in values usually. So We'll talk about that later when we talk about constructors, but for now, this is how you create an object. So now that you have this, what you can do is you can then change the variables inside of the P1 object. So you can go p1.name, as we can see here, and we can make it equal to whatever. So let's say Steve. And that works. So now if we wanted to print out the name of this object, we just go p1.name. And you can see the use of the dot. And notice how it looks pretty familiar. That's because we're using it here, right? So this is why learning about classes this early on is pretty important, because it gives you context for pretty much everything that happens in Java, and pretty much everything that happens in object-oriented programming. So as we can see, it will system out the name that we gave it. Now, we could make this even easier. And what I mean by that is we could use constructors, which I just mentioned before. So a constructor, yet again, a lot of people would say this is a bit advanced, but I actually think it's good to learn these. Public person. It's just like a method, except it has the name of the class, and you just put public there. And that's it, really. It's pretty much like a method. And what this is this is basically going to be run automatically when you create an object. So this here is basically saying to do whatever is in here. So why would you need a constructor? Well, just like the name implies, you're sort of constructing the person. So in this case, we can then put our parameters in here. So let's say string n, make sure it's different than this, by the way. And okay, you take in a string, and we want this string that it takes in to then assign a name to the person. So then we can go this dot name is equal to n, right? So obviously down here we can see that it's got an underline. That's because it's expecting us to pass in a value. So we will do that, and we will call him John this time. And as we can see, we don't have to change the code here because we're just accessing the name. And let's see what happens. We get John. So this is an example what you can do. Now obviously I haven't explained what this is, and basically you could think of it as saying this object, right? So the object that we're creating, which is this, right? Notice how we do p1.name equals whatever. Well, it's kind of like doing that in advanced. It's kind of like doing it here instead of doing it down here. That's basically what this is referring to. It's referring to a potential object, right? So that's basically what that is. And yeah, so that's pretty much your basic constructors and classes and objects. That's pretty much your standard stuff. I'll go into a bit more detail later on in this beginners sort of thing, where we can also talk about inheritance and stuff like that. But very quickly, I'm also going to, let's say, create another class real quick so that I can show off using separate files. It's the exact same thing. So here we can go public company. We can create our constructor. We can create the body of the constructor, and then we put in whatever, but first we need a variable up here. So let's say we put a variable such as, and by the way, this is sort of like another thing to keep in mind is depending on where you put your variable depends on what can access it. So obviously if you put a variable in here, you can't access it out here, but this is sort of a global variable, as they would call it. So let's say we want a string company name, alright, and then we simply just do the same sort of thing, string C, and then we go this dot company name is equal to C, right? And then we can go here and we can create a company object. Company C1 is equal to new company. And then let's put the name of the company. I'm not going to put anything that actually exists. I'm going to put in my own company that I have came up with on the spot. So we're going to call it Joule Inc. Yeah, that sounds about right. So, okay, we created a company. Now here's something really cool that we can do. Yet again, just like we can have fields, we can also have parameters that are for objects as well. So let's say we want a company object. We'll call it company C. And then this, so let's say this person works for this company. So we want to put a company in that they work for. So let's say this dot, now we need to put our company, declare our company variable. So we'll say company comp. And we'll go this dot comp equals, and then we'll just go C. And you can see here that now it's asking us to do that. So let's go, and obviously we need this to be above, otherwise it doesn't know that that code exists. Bam, and then we can go and simply say C1. And there we go. So now we've not only inputted a company into this person, so now this person has a name and a company they work for, but we also, company in and of itself contains a lot of information. You could almost think as an object as like a variable that contains more than one value, really. Oftentimes that's usually what it is. And it also has functions as well. So yet again, same thing with functions. I'll go over this quickly, but it's the same sort of thing. So say you had in this person object, you say public void greeting, and let's say this person can say hello. So we'll just system dot print line hello. All right, make sure it's in quotes, and then we can simply just go down here and say p1 dot, and it should be in here. Yep, greeting. There we go. So we get the name hello John, right? So pretty doable, and yet again we could also system in this case, we could take the person, and then we can grab their company, in this case comp, and we can then grab the name of that company and then print that out. So now we get him saying hello, John, and then we have the name of the company that he's a part of. So that's basically a good introduction into constructors, objects, and this is something you're going to be using a lot. So it's good to know about this, and yeah, it's actually quite simple. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and more to come.